Hello and welcome to the gak.co.uk Guitar Shop podcast. I am your host Mark Packham. Who is with me this evening?
Hello, my name's Matt and I'm the manager in store.
Hello, I'm Joe and I'm here for bass related things.
No Jay Cross this evening. He's just off, isn't he?
He's moved.
Is he?
He's moving house
again.
Yeah.
He moves all the time.
Yeah.
He keeps getting kicked out for being drunk.
People get bored of him saying really excellent. Quite a lot of it.
Yeah.
That dinner that you just made,
It's so cool.
so good. That dinner that you made me was really excellent. People were just like, right, that's it. You've done it one too many times. You're out.
One too many times and that's it.
Gentlemen, how are you? Have you had a good week?
Yes, I've had a charming week. Have you had a good week?
I have, yeah. Just been playing a bit of guitar and whatnot.
Hasn't there been some pedal board reshuffles this week?
Oh yeah, that's right. I bought a pedal off of Matt.
What did you buy?
Just a MIDI pedal for my M5, so I can access more things on my
so
M5.
you can access more MIDI M5-ness.
What does it actually do?
It allows you to scroll up and down through presets easier, because the only disadvantage of an M5 is, for example, you can scroll up and down through 1 to 24 on your presets, but you can't then scroll to preset and then stay in the preset menu to turn everything off. You have to go in between the preset menus.
So basically I want to use more than one effect in a gigging situation, and that's without having to mess around with the pedal board. So this way
it allows you to select which patch you want to switch to and then switch to it.
Yeah, exactly. But if you leave the M5 on, you could just switch patches.
You can use it to scroll up and down,
and the effects will change. Yeah, exactly. And because you can arrange the presets on that, I could, for example, set up, which is exactly what I will do, an octave patch, which is just a light octave onto my clean sound, and then the next patch along on my presets is like a sub fuzz, so kind of like having an octave and a drive pedal on the same time. And now all I have to do is hit up or down, whichever way between those two, and essentially now I can flip between those, and it's like having. It just basically gives me better access to the M5.
Yeah.
I always felt like I wasn't getting the most out of it.
It's just annoying.
It's pretty good for a cheap multi-effects, isn't it? That it's got MIDI compatibility so that you can do.
Well, I mean, I was happy with it anyway because it's cheaper than every good octaver on the market and is a really good octaver. So that was essentially all I was using it for. This just gives me access to everything else.
Yeah.
How about you, Matt? What did you swap in or out this week?
What have I got this week? Still playing around with the soul food. Playing around with. I'm just loving the DD3.
Really?
Yeah. Really? I am probably using it a little bit more than I should, considering I have a timeline on my pedal board. But it is just really good. And what else have I messed around with? Wah pedals. I saw one wah pedal, but I don't know. Every time I have one, I'm kind of just like waka waka waka.
Oh, dude, that's not cool. You just need a fixed position.
But then you don't want to be all. Wah!
No, you just want to slowly move.
You need kind of something in between. You need something in between waka and wah.
Yeah.
I put together the. We're doing this thing on the site at the moment, about sounding like your guitar idol, and a kind of list of what you can buy to make you sound, as we've done on the podcast before. But so I was looking at loads and loads of gear lists, and I was really surprised by how many of the people who are still gigging use Dunlop 535 Qs.
Yeah.
It's really weird because for us that's not a hugely popular. What is it? Most people just get an ordinary original Crybaby. And I can't remember exactly who it was, but if you have a look at those lists, I've put Dunlop 535s in because that's what they're actually using on stage, which is weird because
I can't imagine you'd need to vary the filter, you can't imagine you'd need to vary it that much.
No, and definitely not on the fly.
Yeah. I think if I'm going to get one, I think I might get one of the full-tone ones. Oh. But they're just so much money. But they're so good. The Clyde McCoy?
Clyde McCoy full-tone.
Have you bought any Wamplers yet?
No, I really want the Plexi Drive though. The Plexi Drive's really nice. Yeah, they do the Clyde standard. Yeah, 189 quid.
That's not that much.
No, that's all right. I mean,
and the OnePlus stuff is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, basically the one that I really actually like is the Joe Bonamassa one, actually, because it doesn't have that much of a wide sweep on it, so you can kind of just leave it on, and it kind of just gives you
find your fixed position and then rock it a little bit.
Yeah, that's quite cool. I want to see what the Tweed 57 sounds like on bass.
Yeah. Because I suppose it'd be like running into a basement.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Talking to a guy today who's thinking about he wanted a custom shop, but he wanted to chop in his 69 P bass.
Oh, really?
Ooh. Why did you not?
That is exciting.
Drop me an email.
I thought you were about to say, why did you not chop me in? I was like, what?
Yeah, chop me in.
Yeah, he might bring it in. That'd be interesting to see. It's always nice to see
actual real vintage gear.
Yeah, rather than the brand. Which sometimes when you sell the brand, people are like, do any vintage? The brand or the old stuff?
Yeah, you really need to make that distinction.
But it's weird though, because I bought in, doing a lot of second hand, I bought in a Les Paul from 1995. I was like, wow, that's like 20 years old.
Yeah, that seems very, very weird.
It's like
people, and they're still not revered like a 95. It's not a revered age or anything.
Yeah, it's not like, I've got this cracking 95.
You know how we talk about all the guys who bought Strats and P basses in the 60s, and the 80s turned up and they hacked battery boxes in the back of them and fit EMGs, and we think about how we talk about how like it was so silly because the stuff just wasn't worth anything, but they didn't see a future where that stuff would be, and these 95 is going to be like a golden age.
It's funny though, because actually you say that, and the guy that I was talking to, he's a guitarist by trade. He's owned it for like 25 years. So he's owned it since the early 90s, and then the guy he bought it off, he said, was the original owner. And he was like, yeah, well, at the moment I just play an Elite Strat. And if you don't remember the Elite Strats, they were like an early 80s, early mid 80s, but they had 3 push buttons with a load of active circuitry. Yeah. And that was and he was just like, but then that complemented the music so well because all that clicky kind of so much solid state, no valve, so much solid state. I'm really like clicky and processed. And he said the reason that he thinks the reason it became so popular when he was doing Sony Bandstand is because it kept up with synthesizers doing so many sampled sounds that were kind of all of that real kind of quick and sharp attack. And that's why I suppose that was then to buy vintage gear, because everyone was going, no, I need something like with 3 lace sensors.
You don't want like a muddy Les Paul sound if you're in the mix with that kind of synth, if you're going for that hyper process. So the people now that have
got like 10, 59 Les Pauls are the people who went, I still love them. They're still great. And then in the 80s, went out and bought them for like no money.
Yeah, totally.
I've been watching some videos of, I think we can probably discuss it since it's not even in this country, but Norm's Rare Guitars in California.
Oh yeah.
It's like, there's a couple of videos in there. It's like, 80 new guitars in this week. Let's have a look at what we've got. And he's like, this is probably like the cleanest example of a 54 Epiphone Texan you'll ever see with hanging tags. It's like, what?
Yeah.
So how does that stuff exist?
Yeah,
it's amazing.
It's not quite the same in this country. We still see some nice bits, and we get them in from time to time.
Not much of that stuff made it over here.
No, I think we do better for amps, don't we? Really, in this country.
Well, yeah, because a lot of the stuff was made here.
Of course, yeah, exactly.
Well, again, looking at the this feature that we're doing on the site about Sound Like Your Idol, I was doing Hank Marvin and had to do a bit of research into the first ever Strat brought into the UK, which was bought by Cliff Richard and then used by Hank Marvin. Yeah. And that's a
a depressing fact, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it was in 1960. I think it must have been before that, but it's a kind of maple neck Strat. I think it's like a 56 or 57.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't have, because they're like 50s, aren't they? So
yeah.
54, yeah. So you sort of like mid 50s.
But amazing that was the first one that came in.
Probably like 200 quid, which then was like an absolute
£1 million.
Fortune.
Yeah. Anyway, so in response to talking about UK versus US, this segues very, very well. In response to a question that we had a couple of weeks ago, which asked us to talk about UK and US amps.
We didn't even plan that segue.
No.
That was good.
In fact, we haven't planned any of this podcast.
What were you on about? It's planned down to every word. It's scripted. So
totally scripted. So says Mark.
Yeah. Long pause.
We do actually have scripts.
So I thought it would be good to talk about, in response to that question, UK versus US amps. And I've just got some kind of talking points, really, because I think that not a lot of people know the difference. Not a lot of people will probably know where these different amps come from. Especially with someone like Marshall. I mean, we know that they kind of play up their sort of Britishness and that they are British, but the fact that you've seen them across all genres by all bands all around the world, I guess that fact might be lost on some people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, firstly, let's kind of define what we're talking about. What are the major brands from, say, the UK that we do and that people will know as being UK brands?
I think just quickly, I think we need to define what that question, what the overall question means, sort of the difference between UK and US amps, because you might not know this, but they are both referred to as sounds. People talk about a British sound, and people talk about the US amp sound. So they're and it's I guess what we're talking about is what defines those within there and what brands are key in that. But it's very much spoken about as a general sound. We've mentioned it a million times in sort of
and it
searching
is
for
weird
that
though,
British
isn't it?
tone and things like that.
I suppose then there was no like, oh, I've made this amp and like I'm just going to email matey who lives in America and we're going to talk about Transformers. It was like you couldn't just post an amp to someone on the other side of the world, really.
You kind of just get the one that you could buy in the shop that was like most local to you.
Yeah, and I mean that's really that. I mean if we go back to roots before we even talk about differences, I mean that's how these things started.
Yeah,
you know, Leo Fender had a repair shop that he took other amps in and modified them, and you know, Jim Marshall owned a store and then was like got demands for building amplifiers, and you know, further on from that, same as High Watt and all those sort of things. They come from, I suppose, a player's kind of need, like I need an amp, and someone's like, oh, I can build that. I suppose that's why we've seen so many like boutique pedals. It's the same thing. It's like, can you build me this fuzz that goes absolutely bananas with an effects loop that's got an inbuilt delay? And someone's like, I can do that.
The kind of birth of amps really, and the sort of starting to gain popularity, because I guess before, you know, people were just using vocal PAs to deal with the vocals, and then the instruments probably would have been acoustic, I guess.
And then obviously when you see like the Beatles, is it in Washington, their first ever like American show, and the vocals are going through Voxes, and the guitars are going through Voxes, and the bass is going through a Vox bass rig.
And interestingly, the amps are at the front of the stage.
Yeah,
there's the band standing behind the amps.
Yeah, that was a lot. I mean, you can see a lot of Led Zeppelin concerts and stuff like that where they used to do.
Yeah, because they're like not mic'd up, and the best way to get the most volume out of them is not have them languishing at the back of the stage. Just put them at the front.
Yeah, and I suppose that's where, you know, and obviously that's where things like 100-watt amps and all this sort of thing came from, really.
Well, we've kind of mentioned a few there. So let's say we're talking about UK. What are the brands that kind of we stock and that are notable for being kind of UK brands, really?
Well, we're sitting around one of them.
Yes, we're sat around a huge orange cab that kind of double. Well, it's a desk that looks like an orange cab that doubles as our podcasting table.
Yeah.
So orange would be one.
Yeah, orange would be my favourite one. I mean, Marshall are definitely the biggest, but
Marshall,
orange
and Laney.
Vox. And Laney. We should include Laney, because we should include the new players or newer players. I know Laney.
Well,
Laney
you say that, but Laney, I guess, mid-60s is the first one.
That's true. Yeah. It's just they're so synonymous with a more modern sound.
You forget though. I mean, Tony Iommi's endorsed Laney from like 1969.
Well, they were just made round the corner.
And
or
actually,
something,
in the same way as kind of Fender versus Vox, and you know, things like that, sort of UK versus US, Laney certainly have their nemesis across the pond in PV, I guess as well.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Really, they're similar sort of vibe. So Marshall, Orange, Laney, Vox are what we're talking about when we talk about British amps.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously there are more, but I mean I suppose they're the four main ones.
Yeah.
I mean, High Watt, but there isn't a lot.
As soon as you mention High Watt, you've got to start looking at other sort of little boutique brands as well.
Yeah.
And how about on the American side of things? What are we talking about when we're discussing American amps?
Fender, Mesa
Boogie.
PV, obviously, before aforementioned.
Yeah. What else we do here?
That's about it.
I mean,
those are the ones. I mean, I think, you know, we've mentioned quite a few. I think the big players really, the British ones, I'd almost. I mean, we'll talk about Laney as well, but the big British ones are going to be Vox, Orange, Marshall, and the big American ones are going to be Mesa, Fender.
I suppose it's weird though now because, say for example, with Vox, there isn't a Vox made in the UK.
Yeah, and a lot of the Marshall line isn't made in the UK. But I think when we're talking British amps, it isn't actually where they're made.
No,
it's more
the
sound
and the heritage.
Yeah. So let's just do a quick rundown, really. When we talk about British amps and that kind of British sound, what does that mean to you? when we say,
I mean,
like,
if I was gonna define it in, I hate to say like salesman talk, but like just like more mid-heavy and a little bit more kind of lower grunt to it. Do you know what I mean? Where
Definitely.
I would always say the US amp is slightly brighter and slightly sharper sounding.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought that. I mean, US is obviously defined by that spangly clean that Fender get, or that high gain powerhouse that the Mesa Boogie provide. Both of which are quite. I mean, you get that high gain by having more defined high end, essentially.
Well,
the British sound is much muddier. Voxes are muddier. You know, their cleans very mid heavy.
I mean, it's
oranges you can't play clean.
I suppose it's funny really because there's so many factors that can alter a sound, but you know, a lot of it, you know, it comes down to valves. I mean, a lot of those that, you know, like the smaller, like the Princetons from Fender, and some of the bigger twins are like 6L6s, which have a sharper peak to them, which gives them that a lot brighter sound, and different valves give a different amount of headroom and this, that, and the other. And you know, Marshalls and things like EL, like 84s, KT88s. Like chunkier like valves that just give you more of that sort of raw sort of like mid-heavy crunch, because I suppose the thing with say like Marshall is they were designed to just be turned up loud, you know, and that's where all that kind of drive came from.
What would you say are the kind of key amps to look for if we give the ranges a bit of a rundown? So Marshall, obviously, you know, they do a huge range of stuff. Some of it, I would say, doesn't particularly fall into the category of the kind of typical British sound. Which one should people be looking for if they want that kind of thick Marshall tone these days?
I think if you want a usable amp from Marshall that's going to sound good and you're going to be able to turn it up and use it like in the way that I would say a Marshall should be used, which is basically turn it up and control everything from your guitar. And I've mentioned it before, the Marshall 1974X.
I couldn't agree more.
18 watts. I mean, a plexi effectively in a smaller amp, basically. Two LE84s, 312 AX7s, and a rectifier valve with valve-driven tremolo. I mean, the thing is that classic amps, Marshall amps, you know, plexis, non-master volume amps, sound best when they're turned up at 100 watts. I mean, people go, it's really, you know, got loads of clean, but I just want it to drive, and it's like you can't, you won't, you know. Even
the smaller stuff like Blues Breaker combo, you need so much volume on it to get it to drive.
I love the Blues Breaker. What an incredible amp. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And the thing is, people forget that those drive sounds of old, which are the sounds everyone's trying to emulate, were created by having everything up much louder than we have it today because of our PA system.
And the thing is as well, now you can, with those, you can patch the inputs. You've got 2 volumes and a master, so you can really drive it at like recording volumes, at gigging volumes, you know, however. And you've got really nice, you know, the nice trem on there as well. So I think for me, traditional Marshall, that, or going for, I mean, the other Marshall sound is like DSLs.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the other side of Marshall, really. In a sense, the more modern side. I mean,
Mark's mentioned it before. You've mentioned it before that it is kind of the amp that defined punk pop when that was
kind of. Yeah. I mean, I would say that from like, I mean, starting off with something like JCM 800, and then in the 90s moving into the kind of 900, and then this century. Moving into the JCM 2000 series, things like the DSL 50, I think, were a classic Marshall amp and really underrated. You know, you don't hear that heralded up there with the 800 or the like things like the Blues Breaker, that kind of 60s and 70s stuff.
Yeah. Because I think the 800s had a lot more gain, and then plexis have got loads more headroom, and then I think because obviously the preamp and how the preamp is designed plays a big part in how an overall amp sounds as well.
Would you say that the JCM 800 was kind of Marshall's almost a move away from that thick British tone?
Yeah,
because they are more gainy and they are a bit more toppy. I mean, they're still a great sounding amp.
Well, I mean, who you think? The 2 players that kind of spring to mind that use that sort of amp are Slash and Zach Wilde for me. The two main ones, you know, and the Slash sound is that. I mean, he uses a Jubilee, but that's effectively what they are. It's a slightly different version, but that's what it is. It's everything comes from that pretty much. just turned up. But I think it was to me, I suppose, almost in Marshall, probably the invention of having a master volume made a huge difference, because that meant you can drive the preamp where you're going to get a lot of gain from and then control the overall output volume. So, yeah, I suppose maybe a move away into another thing, I think, because I don't know whether they kind of dipped in popularity, and as we were just saying before we started, like in the late 70s and 80s, when I think stuff went rack and solid state, and I was reading about The Cure the other day, and their main amps are jazz choruses. Like you couldn't get more crisp and clean than something like that, really.
It's kind of almost amazing that Marshall survived that period, really, because the stuff that they're doing was like super high gain, really chunky, dirty sounding stuff.
Yeah.
When you listen to a lot of the kind of poppier records around that time, they weren't that sound at all.
Yeah.
How about Vox then? Because Vox is still very much a British sound, but they don't sound like Marshall. What are you getting if you buy a Vox, and what are really the key models that today someone can walk into a shop and pick up?
Well, I suppose with Vox, the nice thing is that, I mean, Marshall, they do a lot of good amps, they do a huge range, but Vox pretty much just do the only amp they should have ever have done, which is
they just do lots of versions of the AC30 and the AC15.
Yeah, I mean they have a range of amps, but they are all.
I mean, they do the Night
series.
Train stuff as well, but that's more their sort of competitor with Mesa and going for a completely different sound.
I mean,
whereas the AC stuff is just what defines them, the AC30.
I would say the Night Train stuff is their attempt really at producing something versatile and affordable, whereas the ACs, I mean, they're still affordable. They do a huge, different range of them, but they're not the most versatile amp in the world. They very much sound like AC30s.
Yeah. So here's a little bit of info to give you a start. AC30 was originally introduced in 1958 as the big brother to the AC15 at Hank Marvin's request, because the AC15 was not loud enough for the screaming fans at Cliff Richard concerts.
There we go.
So I mean that's the thing. These
more
bigger
depressing facts.
Yeah. I mean that's the thing. All of these bigger amps have, I suppose, it wasn't because people were like, it sounds different. It's just we need more volume.
Yeah, things like the big Vox bass rig that they had to design it for Paul McCartney, because he was just like, I can't hear it at all. I can't hear the bass because people are screaming too loud.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would say that although Vox, they just do the ACs, obviously the range is huge. Can you give us a rundown on like where it starts? What's the entry level stuff on the AC side of things, and where does it go up to?
So now they start AC15. So 15 watts, single channel, and they start 488.
Well, we should mention the Valve Reactor series, because they do a little hybrid, don't they? Which is Valve preamp and solid state output stage.
Right. Yeah. Solid state
the
output
only thing is, I would say they don't sound a huge amount like a traditional AC15, but they sound pretty good.
But they do sound good for what they are, and I think they're incredibly affordable, and you do get the look, which is a huge part of those Vox amps.
But I suppose the main thing, those compared to the full Valve ones, is they're actually dual channel.
Yes, so you get, I mean, they are a bit different, I guess, because you can almost get like an American rock sound out of them, because you can push the front end. Yeah. So, but let's talk about the proper British Valve stuff then. What, where do we come in at?
So, I mean, they start now, I think it's $799. Yeah, for an AC30.
That's right, and you can get hand-wired ones in cool finishes and stuff like that.
Yeah, so they do like one with greenbacks, and they do one with Alnico Blues, which is the more traditional ceramic speaker. But overall, Vox is like very jangly sounding. I think that's the word that's always kind of...
Yeah, very jangly. I mean, we use that word a lot in association with Fender as well.
I mean, to me,
jangly and sparkly are different.
Yeah, I think so
Vox
too.
is kind of a MIDI... I always thought of them as being a slightly more soupy version of Fender sort of thing.
I think they've got the top end of a Fender, but they've just got this extra little bit of break-up and just brightness.
They're nowhere near as polite as Fender stuff. Fender stuff can be very, very sweet sounding. I mean, the Vox, I don't think Vox do sweet. They do aggressive and like almost like nasal, but in a good way.
Well, I mean, to me, it's always now by the beginning of Hard Day's Night, whether they actually used
Yeah, that will be.
I mean, that chord.
I
mean, there's no. I mean, obviously, there's always been talk about the chord.
Yeah.
But to me, you play something that sounds similar with a little bit of jangle on something like that, and you just hear it. You know, it's just a great rhythm sound.
Yeah, I think that is the purest example of like what an AC30 sounds like. Is just
because
Hard Day's Night era Beatles.
It's just it's nice because they're a single channel amp that you've got 2 inputs, normal or top boost. Top boost gives you a little bit more brightness, and then like a master volume. So the nice thing is you can drive that preamp a little bit harder, and you've still got control of your output volume as well.
I've always thought of them as somewhere in between Fender and Orange.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of right. Yeah, but a bit more kind of mid.
Yeah, I mean, very much so for me because the music that I play, everyone who plays sort of math or plays rock or things plays Orange amplification.
Yeah,
and the only variance you seem to see is that a few people use AC30s.
Use Vox stuff. Yeah. Just quickly, what are people getting if they upgrade to the X series stuff? So you'll often see AC30C2 and then the AC30C2X.
Yeah, so generally with the X you get, like I said, the Alnico Blues, which are the more traditional Vox speakers. To me, Greenback's slightly darker. I've never been a huge fan of the overall sound of Greenbacks in a cab. I think they work with some amps, they don't work with others. Alnico Blues, because they're like, they're ceramic. I think they're ceramic magnets in the Alnico Blues, I think. I don't know, they just break up a little bit sooner. They're not as efficient. So the more efficient the speaker is, effectively the more clean headroom you're going to get. So, they break up a little bit sooner. And I just think they're just a little bit more harsh, but that kind of works.
Yeah, well, that's what you want for an AC30. Yeah, you do want that kind of harshness.
Because, I mean, the thing is, you think of the Beatles, but then you also think of, like, Brian May. Do you know what I mean? He's running, like, 3 at, like, cranked up to the max. Do you know what I mean? And that's where you get that awesome drive sound. That and a treble booster is just an amazing sound.
I remember someone I know went to see Brian May's setup, and he had, for the gig, he had 3 AC30s. Because he uses like vintage ones, they're a bit rickety because they're such an old amp.
Yeah.
And he had 3 behind each one, so that when one went down mid gig, the tech could literally just lift it up and then just pull another one forward, and there'd just be one ready to go behind it.
I saw a video once talking to their tech, and they were like, one will catch fire every gig.
I mean, we're talking about 50-year-old amps here. It's they've put in a decent stretch.
I mean, and the thing is, I think now that there's so much of that kind of revival in like vintage gear and vintage sound that they've gone back to being so much more classic sounding, and that everything sort of changed in the 70s and 80s, and I think things probably like production went cheaper.
Yeah.
And now they're kind of not holding back with that. They're going, let's make them sound exactly. Because, to be honest, you buy a 60s one. I mean, I had a 1964 Vox AC4, which sounded amazing, but the first time I turned it on, it sounded like it smelled like it was going to catch on fire.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that there is definitely a push towards a more vintage.
So, I mean, to me, you plug them in and you just like that. Yeah, that. I think that's why these brands have stayed around so long, because you plug in a Marshall, like a 1974, and it sounds like a Marshall. You plug in an AC30 and you're like, yeah, it sounds. You even if you don't know what those amps are, you've heard that sound so many times, and when you make that connection, you're like, oh, that's what a Vox sounds like.
Let's quickly talk about Orange and Laney, and then we'll
save the best one,
and then we'll go across the pond and talk about their American counterparts. So Orange have had a bit of a strange history, because obviously, very big in the sort of 60s and 70s. And then it kind of all went quiet, really. I guess they didn't really sort of survive the kind of 80s, when people were using kind of rack gear and stuff. They sort of fell out of favour. But, I mean, since then, they've had an incredible renaissance. I mean, I can't remember the last time I went to a gig without seeing an Orange rig of some description.
Yeah, it's weird, because I remember when I first started playing guitar, I don't really remember a lot of, like, Orange being, like, anywhere.
Well, I occasionally remember seeing people like Noel Gallagher use them.
Well, I mean, he was probably the main person to use them at that point, wasn't he?
But it was more of a novelty. Like, I don't remember them seeing them as an actual brand that you could buy in shops.
That's it. I mean, I don't know. It's certainly because Omar Rodriguez Lopez used one that spurred an entire generation of post-rock shoegaze and math rockers to all buy Orange amps.
Yeah.
And just to a ridiculously, I mean, slightly different. The bass side of things, obviously not quite Omar Rodriguez influence. But for example, I played a festival in Leeds on the weekend. There were 16 bands playing across 2 days. Everyone had to bring their own heads, obviously, for this. There were 15 Orange bass terrors there. One guy turned up with a Hartke LH500. Everyone else had a bass terror.
Was that you?
No, I had the bass terror. The Hartke is a perfectly good head as well. I really like that head, actually. But yeah.
I do think Orange have been very, very clever, because they could have rested on their laurels in a way that almost like someone like Hiwatt has, and have gone, we used to make great amps in the 60s and 70s that everyone loved. Here's direct reissues of those, hand-wired, really expensive. That's all we need to sell, and we'll still, we'll continue on.
Yeah.
What Orange have done has gone, no, let's go and see what young guys want. Let's go and see what sort of features they want. Let's get into the metal scene. Like, imagine
the Jim Root was a genius.
Or imagine a few years thinking like, I'm going to go to a metal gig and see a load of Orange amps.
Yeah.
You just wouldn't have thought that would happen. But
I think that's the thing. I think they kind of went, well, because we definitely sell more of the more modern sounding Oranges than we do like the classic vintage ones.
Yeah.
I mean, the Custom Shop 50 sounds amazing. The RR50 sounds amazing. The RR15 sounds amazing. But we sell so much more like Dark Terrors and things like that, because it just, I think they've kind of nailed that kind of real high gain preamp, but with the British sound rather than a Mesa Boogie, which we'll get to, that's got kind of much more of that traditional like American rock sound.
Yeah. We think about the ordinary Tiny Terror. It's ridiculous. It's very rugged. Comes in a really easy to transport gig bag. Is incredibly reliable and sounds brilliant, and is really, really simple. Just
and super affordable.
And super affordable. If you want something to tour with, it's just pretty much such a go-to.
They pretty much single-handedly like started the small amp revolution. Really,
I remember seeing it when it first came out and just going, "What?"
Yeah. I mean, they came out probably not long after I started.
Yeah.
Here, and they were just like, that was the smallest thing you could buy, and then suddenly we were selling like 10 a day. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like people left, right, and centre going, "Oh, I want a Tiny Terror," and then everything just came mini versions from that, really, didn't it?
Just quickly, give us a couple of examples of Orange stuff that people should look out for and what they're kind of getting from those amps. Are we saying that the Tiny Terror, I guess, is one of those?
Yeah, I think that the Tiny Terror is absolutely brilliant as something that's exactly what I said, ridiculously affordable, incredibly simple, incredibly reliable. I just don't think you can top it.
I think the only note there is that they don't clean up particularly well.
But no, I don't think, if you want clean, don't buy an Orange, because that's not what they're there for.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people plug them in expecting to get some of that kind of shimmery cleanness.
Yeah, because a lot of them have 2 channels, which is...
I think that's the thing, though, is like, for example, I think one of the Custom Shop ones has got like an attenuator that's foot switchable, so you can attenuate it for really drive sounds, but you can have it super clean, and you can attenuate and have the preamp turned all the way up.
Yeah.
So you can do it that way. But for me, I think that they're kind of the sound they're going for, and the sound they've just really nailed in terms of super high gain. That's where you're seeing it. I just think the dual Dark Terror, I just think amazing.
We haven't mentioned Thunders or Rockaverbs or anything.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose they're all kind of almost, I don't know, led up to that point. I suppose
the dual Darks aren't really part of the Terror series, are they? Because they're in a full size head.
Yeah, I suppose.
I do think their new Pro Crush series is worth a mention. As well, just for being just another genius move. If they hadn't just sealed up microamps, they then sealed up solid state as well.
Yeah, I think they are worth a mention, because unlike something like the Vox Valve Reactor, where they've gone for, okay, this is a solid state amp, but it's got a valve in there, so it's a bit warmer sounding, but let's make it do loads of stuff. It'll do super clean, plus it'll do like American-y drive.
And it doesn't really sound like a Vox.
It doesn't sound like a Vox. What they've done with the Crush Pros is go, let's just make it sound like a really good Orange amp, but we'll make it solid state.
Well, exactly, and they haven't affected their own sales in that at all. I was speaking to a chap the other day who knew his son wanted an Orange, and that was as far as it went. And so I talked him through some sort of entry-level Orange bits, the Tiny Terror, and I mentioned the Crush Pro stuff, and I was really upselling the Crush Pro stuff, despite the fact that it is a good sort of couple of £100 cheaper than the Terror gear. And he was of a mind that, despite the fact that I, the salesman, was telling him to buy a cheaper amp because the valves, the fact that there are no valves in there are neither here nor there, it sounds incredible. He was of a mind that valves are still an essential, and people will still think that. So they haven't even hurt their own business by introducing.
They just made something that's much more affordable. Okay, and last on our amp quest across this fair isle, let's talk a little bit about Laney.
Yeah.
So Laney are a bit of a kind of anomaly in this chat, really, in that I don't think there's not one Laney sound. They do very much some high gain stuff that is still, it's kind of got a British take on things. When you look at like the VH series, is that right, Matt? The high gain stuff.
GH50L. I think that's one of the most popular ones, isn't it? They're like almost single channel, like really high gain preamp. But they've been an amp company since 1967.
Yeah, exactly. But that said, I don't. There's no 1967 Laney sound that's especially sought after. So
to me, it's now by Tony Iommi. I think that kind of real high gain.
I mean,
I think maybe an amp manufacturer at that time that was maybe more focused on a slightly high gain preamp that gave you more of that kind of thick fuzzy drive, where other amps were doing 100 watts because they could be super loud.
I think even more so than Orange, they've not. They haven't really played on their vintage status. They've just kind of gone, we just want to make really good amps to a super high quality.
Exactly.
And a lot of it they still make in Britain.
My favourite amp of last year was the Ironheart Studio.
Yeah, great. Again, they've added features like USB and stuff like that I think some of these other manufacturers we've already talked about might be a tad scared to. Laney are really about progressive.
Exactly, and I was so excited about the Ironheart because it was a step forward, and because it was them, and that's something that we'll never see. We will probably see it, but we don't see as often the classic companies going out on a limb like that, sort of risking it to kind of bring something new in.
Okay, let's do a quick overview of the American competitor. I guess we're going to talk about Boogie and Fender. Matt, you're a bit of a Boogie expert, probably more so than me or Joe. What are Boogie doing at the moment, and what are people going to get from the amps that you talk about?
Well, the one thing that I really like about Boogie at the moment is that they are still making super high quality, pretty much boutique amps, but they're not going down the route of some boutique amp manufacturers out there that are charging $4,500 for a valve head. They're still a very, very small company that still build pretty much everything by hand in California. And you just get, for me, like plugging in, I sold a dual rectifier to someone the other day, and the drive sound on that is just the great, like a produced American rock sound. Do you know what I mean? It's tight. It's not too fizzy. You've got loads of bottom end. You've got loads of top end definition that cuts through, and they're just a great drive amp. They do really nice, like sparkling cleans as well. But the rectifier sound, which is what they're known for, and they still make, is just that great produced rock sound, which I just love. I just think it sounds great.
It's pure power, isn't it? When you plug in something like a dual rec, even the clean sound is like so much bottom end, and it's
so tight, and so thick, and a lot of that comes down to, the cat, especially when you pair it with a 4x12, it's just
they've got those kind of sealed 412s, haven't they? That are just it's a weird effect really, because Marshall amps sound very big, but they sound very big in a much looser way than a Boogie. Like Boogie's got that real like kick you in the
tight
chest
thump.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's weird when you talk about amps, because obviously we're using words that I suppose if you didn't really know what we're talking about, you just think we're making up. But it's the words that have come about from guitarists for the last 50 years, kind of thinking the best way to describe it, and they are very, very tight sounding.
There really is a physical thing with Boogie though, that the speed at which they react, because they're very much like you say, like tight sounding. That's to do with just that instant power, and like I said, that kind of kick in the chest.
And who didn't? now they've kind of, they have moved on and they make things like the transatlantics and stuff, which we go into. But I mean, who didn't play a boogie like the last
in 10 years,
15 years?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Everyone had them in their rig at some point. And I mean, now they make things like the Mark V, which mean they're still cheaper than some boutique amps out there. And they've pretty much got every boogie that's ever been made in one amplifier.
Yeah.
There's 3 separate amps that have all got their own switchable voltage. They've got 3 different types of preamp. They've all got their own EQ. They've all got presettable like slider EQs. All got their own reverbs. I mean, for what, 2,799. So if you want to go into something like super in depth, I mean, there's not a sound you can't get out of it.
And again, like we said, kind of hand built and made to a very, very high spec.
Yeah, I mean, and they do things. I used to have a Mesa Boogie Lone Star, super clean, super jangly, that real kind of like country sort of like sparkle, and they just they sound great. And obviously we've got things they're still making things like we've got the King Snake.
Yes, let's talk about the King Snake, because I hadn't seen this until I stepped through the door of the shop today.
Yeah, me neither.
The King Snake, amazing.
I took some photos of it. I put them up on Twitter.
I must admit, at first I was like, it's a lot of money. It's not made of real snake skin, for anyone out there just thinking.
J Cross.
Yeah, you can't play it because it's not vegan. But it's basically the same amp that Randall Smith, who's the guy that started Mesa Boogie, built for Santana. And it's a Mesa Boogie Mark 1. It's the amp, I suppose, that in a sense kind of started it all. Single channel, but you've got 2 different inputs. So input 1 cascades volume 1 into volume 2 and then into master, so you can crank both up and you can kind of get a mixture of 2 different preamps.
Yeah.
But just an amazing sounding amp. Like, you can get it to be super clean, you can get it to be super distorted. It's really, really dynamic. And I don't know if Randall Smith actually had a part in building them, but he's hand signed every one.
Oh wow!
But it's they're all hand signed on the inside of the chassis and everything. But I just think it's a hot back to a real like classic vintage sound. You can go down to 10 watts at 2 or 4 power tubes and either go all the way up to 100, and you just get that real singing sustain which Santana was known for in the really early days, which is what he used. And it's just like kind of plug something in with humbuckers and sing forever, really.
And again, comes back to what you were saying about people, like Randall Smith taking in amps and modding them, because he sort of started out really modding Fender stuff, didn't he?
Yeah.
And that segues nicely into, I guess, our other big American brand, Fender. Now, obviously, very, very well known for the guitars. We talk about Strats and Tellys all the time, P basses, jazz basses, etc. I sort of think to the general public, I think the general public don't necessarily see them as an amp brand. When people think of amps, I think people think of brands like Marshall and Vox. But Fender, when you look at some of the people that have used Fender amps and the kind of records and the historic moments they've been involved in, Fender are almost bigger than anyone on the amp side of things.
Yeah, I mean, from 1948. It was like one of the very first Tweed amps.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose it's weird because, in the 60s, 70s, it was kind of like, right, they have to be really big and super loud, and they never really did anything like that. There were these little like club amps. So I suppose when people came over, like, with the British invasion, and people were kind of turning up with massive stacks, you just recognise Marshall, don't you?
Yeah.
But I mean, I suppose these amps made more of a thing in the studio with like Clapton and, Clapton probably being one of the biggest players of that sort of thing, along with a Marshall, kind of, going back to like Tweed amps and just turning them all the way up. Or Neil Young, I suppose, would probably be the...
Yes, when using like Deluxes and Showmans,
which at that point were at 12 watts and they're turned all the way up.
That's such an impressive sound as well. When you hear like even a modern low wattage Fender amp turned all the way up, I suppose nothing sounds like that.
I suppose we should say, really, because I do mention it a lot, when I'm just talking to customers, is that I think people come in and go, maybe not so much now because of smaller amps, but people go, 100 watts, like it's twice as loud as 50, and 50 is twice as, and like when you've got half power switch on a an orange Tiny Terror that goes between 15 and 7, you don't just get, you're not getting half volume. You're actually physically changing the way the valves are working, the amp's working, and it changes your overall tone.
Basically, I mean, the way that I sum it up is, if you want something to be super clean and super sparkly, go for the highest, the most amount of watts, the most headroom that you get.
Yeah,
you get really
for
get
exactly that reason.
Yeah, you get that clean headroom.
The more headroom.
Yeah. Like a Fender Twin, jangly.
Yeah, but if you want it to drive it, if you want to get nice natural push from the amp, then go for something fairly low wattage.
Yeah.
Just quickly, because we have been going on for a fair time, what are the key things that people should be looking out for from Fender?
Apart from the Blues Junior?
Well, that's it, isn't it? I mean, we talk about that. We talk about the Blues Junior more than any other amplifier.
Yeah, I mean,
I think we do. I mean, that is for me why I do think Fender amps are underrated, because I think the Blues Junior is literally, I would say, in the top 3 amps on the market today.
I mean, the Hot Rod series is obviously the amp. I reckon there's probably more people have bought Hot Rod amps than probably anything else in the last.
Blues Juniors, Hot Rod Deluxes. Yeah.
I mean, who hasn't owned a Hot Rod Deluxe at one point or another? Bright and sparkly, loud. 2 channels with an extra gain switch, reverb. I mean, it is that classic Fender jangle. And I think now there's more of this vintage revival. You're seeing more tweed amps and things like that.
Yeah, I agree.
Those Hot Rods have been a staple since the mid-90s. Really,
can I just mention 2 that I think people should really look at? 57 Bassman, lacquered tweed. Amp. Just unbelievable. Obviously originally designed for bass, but guitar players kind of took it to their heart because it's just such a powerhouse.
Yeah.
I was watching something with Chuck Berry playing Bassman, and just the most amazing guitar sound. 335 plugged straight into a Bassman, turned all the way up.
Yeah.
That is rock and roll. That is just the rock and roll sound.
Yeah.
The other amp that I really want to mention, because we used one today for some filming, Supersonic.
Yeah.
Which,
great.
I mean, people are starting to cotton on that Fender have basically made an amazing drive amp. Something that's got a very, very modern, usable drive sound on it. That, for me, hearing that again today has reminded me just how good those Supersonic amps are.
I think one thing I'd just like to put in, I think really the expansion of available effects has really changed the way that people and these companies probably make amps and think about amps, because you hear one thing you'll hear now more than ever is it takes pedals really well. It's a thing that you necessarily probably people didn't think, if I buy this Bassman, I'm not going to be able to plug like my delay into it and all my fuzz pedals, because there just wasn't anything. You bought an amp and you made it sound how you wanted it with your guitar, and the same with 100 watts. And I think that's really has changed how amps are made and people think about the kind of overall manufacture of them as well.
Yeah, I think one other thing on Fender before we move on is I think that I was thinking about this the other day. I think maybe they've got their sights set on bass this year a little bit more than maybe they have. We saw last year they introduced the Super Bassman, or reintroduced the Bassman and Super Bassman as bass amps, again properly geared up to be bass amps with proper bass cabs and proper bass valves and everything. And you're starting to see them on an awful lot of backlines for big bands now.
100%. They've kind of almost, a lot of people I think have swapped those for, instead of SVTs, they're taking the Fender
they are. Well, the
stuff.
SVTs are, harder to get hold of now. Ampeg are making a lot less of them, and certainly the SVTs don't sound and are not made in the same way that they were back in the day. And the Super Bassman is just representing something that's incredible build quality and amazing sound.
If I was in a position where I was doing big gigs and had roadies, I would take a Super Bassman.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think recently we've seen the SVT be replaced by the Orange AD200 on the bass front as the most popular sort of valve bass head, and I certainly see that head at bigger shows sort of more than anything else. But the Super Bassman hasn't been around long enough to cement itself yet, but the best sounding all valve bass head, and also with their redesign of the Rumble this year to look good for the
so many of those recently. They're so good.
They are so good, and that's kind of the thing that Fender have just introduced a really good looking, affordable, lightweight, small entry level bass amp. I think drives really nicely.
There's a big shout for them to be in Gear of the Year at the end of the year this year, because I don't think anything's going to top them in new bass products.
Agreed.
So, one last question then, and PV. I think maybe we can touch on PV a little bit. Okay. I kind of want to do PV in a separate podcast, because
You love Peavey.
I really like Peavey.
Peavey Range 158.
We don't. That was my first ever amp. We don't talk about Peavey enough, and I want to do that in a separate cast.
What, talk about all the Valve Kings, 5150s?
So much new stuff. Bandits. New Valve Kings, new 5150s. The Bandit, which we've kind of gushed over quite a few times.
They're great. You know, they do like 2 all-valve bass heads. They do a £2,000 all-valve bass head. They do a £1,000 all-valve bass head.
And they do the whole new bass series that they've done. Let's do Peavey in a different podcast, because I think it'd be super interesting and we could go into quite a lot of detail.
And Peavey are awesome.
One last question in that case to round off this topic. Do you prefer, or which are better, let's make it more controversial, British or American amps? Matt Knight. And why?
Owning, not that we do these particular brands, but owning 2 American-built amplifiers, I personally prefer the sound of American amps. And if I could have anything, I would probably have a vintage Fender Tweed amp. I had a Basement and I've had a 57 Deluxe, and they are amazing. It's just, I think you need to turn them up more. But one thing I really do want is a vintage Vox. But I would say American for me.
Joe Branson?
The question's a little harder for me because I'll come at it from a bass perspective. Because one brand we didn't mention that absolutely own bass is Ampeg, who are American. So, but that said, I think overall, Orange are the best sounding amplifiers I've ever heard, and I just love that mid-range sort of sound. That kind of there's something that just seems a little bit more vintagey rock and roll from all the British sounding stuff. I'm not into the high gain stuff that Mesa do, and I don't really have any interest in clean, so Fender are no go as well. So Orange and the British sound certainly for guitars. Ampeg still do have it on the bass front by the skin of their teeth for me.
Well, that gives me the casting vote, and I'm going to abstain because I want to take this to listeners. I want people to email in podcast@gak.co.uk and tell us which they prefer. For me, I love AC30s and I love Fender valve amps, so I'm not going to cast a vote. I want to see what we get the most votes for via the email podcast@gak.co.uk.
And either me or Joe will win a prize.
Yeah.
So help me win a prize. Packham can think of the prize.
You can give me your favourite amplifier, and if
I have to buy it.
No, you've got to give me one of your amplifiers.
Oh, my favourite amplifier is the Peavey Range 158. So you can.
This is perfect. Should we do some staff picks?
Yeah.
Matt Knight, what have you been playing this week?
I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about it on my day off.
This is vintage, Matt.
I know.
I just see what it is.
Do you know what? I had one, and I think I'm going to buy one again because I don't know why I sold it, because they're awesome, and that's the Line 6 DL4.
Absolutely brilliant pedal.
A lot of people go, oh well, you've got an M5, but the reason I've gone back to a DL4, I came to a conclusion this weekend that my main Pedal Train Pro pedal board is done. It is done. It is reached.
Never. I don't believe that for a second.
A peak. It cannot go. It cannot go any further.
You're at peak board.
The first time it was one of the first times I plugged it in and gone, yep. Every sound I've got, like, yep. Just don't need to change anything. So I dusted off my Diego commuter and all my spare pedals and went, do you know what I want this pedal board to do? Those are really insane sounds, and I want to do some really wacky stuff. And I really wanted the looper. But not any looper.
Wait, the DL4 will take up the entire Diego commuter.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to have to go. I'm going to have to, I'm starting the process again, Joe. It's it's like watching a child grow. It's, you start off with a little commuter, and then they get their first, they go to school and they get their little pedal train one, and then they become an adult and they get the El Grande that comes with its own flight case and wheels.
I worry about your relationship.
Sometimes I think that if I was in a really famous band, had loads of money, I'd get pedal train to. You know how you get motorised golf carts that carry your golf clubs around, so you walk along with your pedal board to gigs. So I would just have one that was on wheels, like on a Segway, so you can kind of pull it along in a little tray. No,
seriously,
that'd be amazing. You could have a pedal board remote controlled, so in between shows, one would drive off and the next one would in between songs.
But yeah, in my crazy world, I really want one for the looper, because the looper's got so many. I think it's one of the most fun.
Still my favourite ever looper.
I mean, it's only like, I think 14 seconds.
Yeah, it is.
But it does that quintessential, that sort of quick loop noise sample there.
Yeah, the nice thing is you can do that, like, they can do that real kind of cool stop and start, because you can hammer the start button and it will restart the loop loads. It's cool to do like half time and reverse, and I think that's features that other loop pedals haven't really like accessed on the fly.
But that's why the DL4 is definitely one of the best delay pedals ever made, because it's got so much stuff in there that pedals after it have kind of forgotten about, like how much fun it is.
Yeah, I completely agree.
It's made reverse and it's still the only one that makes reverse and halftime a usable feature to make some cool sound effects. Yes, you can get it on a Boss, but you have to kind of go in there and change the setting for that particular. Yes, you can get it on the Pigtronics one. Yes, you
get it on the new Ditto as well, can't you?
Yeah, but with the Ditto one, you have to. The second button on the X2 has to be effects, or it has to be a stop button. It's kind of like DL4, and the nice thing is, if you're not looping anything, it's got a pre-delay section in there, so all the front panels still work like a delay pedal.
Yes.
You just can't turn it on and off, but you can still have a delay sound in the background, which means that you can loop oscillating delay sounds without having to have two delay pedals.
They're incredibly robust as well.
Yeah.
I was watching a band called Shrine the other week, and their guitarist plays one of these, and they're quite a very heavy screamy band. And their guitarist hammered into this pedal, really stomped on it, and I just saw like one of the black buttons fly out, and one of the stomps, the actual metal stomps, sort of fly off into the thing. And I was speaking to him afterwards, and he was like, "Yeah, it's happened before. I'll just put it back on. It'll be fine." It looks like an absolute sort of, fatal wound to any pedal.
I really want one. Now that we've been talking about it.
I would say it's a modern classic, realistically. Yeah. I think that the only reason it stood the test of time, and that the M5 or the M9 or, hasn't kind of gone, oh, we're just going to discontinue, or the fact that all the other range have done, the FM4, the MM4, all of those things have just disappeared.
Yeah.
DL4, you still see it on a million pedal boards. It still sounds good. I mean, it is amazing, and yeah, I've just kind of like talked myself into it more. Really, I think I think the thing is, realistically, 3 presets and tap tempo.
That's
I mean,
it's what
don't
you need.
Get me wrong. Timeline sounds amazing. Yes, you can do a lot with it, but I only mess around with it and use all those cool effects. Most of the time, I want 3 good delay sounds
and the looper maybe.
Yeah.
Joe Branton, what have you been playing this week?
Well, this week, I couldn't think of anything, and there haven't been any new things. And you were asking me what my stuff pick was going to be this week, and I went into the bass department to have a little butcher's round, and I was looking at the shelves, and I was like, is this it? I mean, bear in mind, we probably have more basses on the shelf than any other bass section in a shop.
Anyone else would be overwhelmed, but the fact that you've basically come in every week and sit down for like half an hour, 45 minutes, and just play everything.
Yeah. And I was looking around, and I looked at the Gibson wall, and I was like, well, there are the Gibsons. I love them. I've spoken all about them. I looked at the Fender wall, and I was like, just P basses and jazz basses. I looked at the the Ibanez thing, and I was like, there are lots of SRs, I don't really like them. And I was kind of like, there's the Squier wall, and then I was like, well, there's the ESP wall, they've got some cool bits. And I was trying to think, is there an ESP that I want to try out? But even there wasn't any new stuff there, and I was like, and then I sort of turned around, on a separate stand sitting there before me was this new limited edition Sterling Ray 34 California spec fretless. and I love fretless.
It's always the fretless.
But also, my only problem with the Sterling stuff, and it's not a problem as such, is that they don't do any finishes that especially sort of really
none of them grab you.
No, exactly. But it's black with a taut guard, which is my favourite finish for like Fenders, certainly for jazz basses. But on a Music Man, and it's incredible. A rosewood neck with just a black body finish and a taut guard looks incredible. And then it was fretless. So I was like, God, this is this is awesome.
That was made for you.
I know, exactly.
That's the only time that black looks good is when it's got a tortoiseshell guard.
Well, no, I'm a big fan of black guitars, but black with taut and rosewood is absolutely killer. On a Stingray, it looks amazing. And I was like, it's less than 900 quid for this incredibly sort of professional, traditional spec Musicman endorsed instrument, and it's fretless. Yeah, these. If Music Man were making this, I'd be looking at sort of coming up for $2,000 sort of thing, and it was absolutely brilliant. Like the build, its setup is perfect, it's straight out the box, and just the workmanship on it is incredible. They're just absolutely killer instruments. So just for something weird that's limited edition and is a bit unusual, a fretless Music Man Stingray is the absolute bomb. No.
Excellent. I was about to unleash my staff pick, but I've just read what the first question is, and my staff pick kind of answers the question. So shall we do some questions?
Yeah. You can answer the first question.
I will. Please do write in if you've got questions, podcast@gak.co.uk. We always like answering them, and we shall do so thusly. David via email writes in.
Firstly, really enjoy your podcasts every week.
Stop it.
Keep it up.
Stop it.
I would value your opinions, please.
Right, David via email writes in. Firstly, really enjoy your podcasts every week. Keep it up. I would value your opinions, please, as you will see from the following that I am most confused in the effects department. Apart from my Line 6 guitars, I have a Vox Valvetronics VT20, which I use a lot, but I find it takes too long to adjust the settings. I also have a Fender Blues Junior with a Digitech RP255 and a selection of Boss pedals in a BCB60. I only play at home, but I have a desire to seek out a good selection of tones, but I want to find them very quickly. You often mention the Boss ME80 multi-effect system. Is it simple for a novice guitarist to use, and could it effectively replace what I have already?
Mark,
yes.
Pack 'em.
So, my staff pick this week is the Boss ME80. The reason it's a staff pick
is because you bought one.
I finally got around to buying one. I am, despite having worked in a guitar shop for 13 years, I would describe myself as basically a novice guitarist. I'm pretty much a bass player. Well, no, I am a bass player. I didn't mean that as a cuss. I'm not saying that novice guitarists are bass players. What I'm saying is I happen to be a bass player who also considers himself.
You are digging yourself out of a hole.
Not
now.
a particularly good guitarist. So, just because I'd seen I filmed the video that you did with it, Matt, and saw some of the sonic experimentation you were doing. I bought one because I don't play enough guitar at home. I don't really have room or a situation that allows me to have a loud amp or many single effects. So I bought an ME80, and I can honestly say it's the most fun I've had playing guitar probably since I started. Never been like an effects collector, never had loads of stuff. The ME80 just makes it super simple and super effective to use effects. Which I never thought I would ever say. I just sit with headphones with it on, been playing around with the delays, making, some quite weird patches that I wouldn't basically buy the single effects to make those sounds. No. If I was buying a single effects, I'd buy a drive and a delay probably.
And here's the thing, it used to be the case that if you were going to do that, if you wanted to do what you would be doing, then I suppose you wouldn't really need the quality of the effects to be that good if it was just for messing around. But the fact is on the M80, that all of those individual effects are absolutely incredible, ridiculously professional and all brilliant, all really accessible and affordable.
I mean, as far as I can tell, things like the DS, the distortion setting on there, that is not any different to a DS1. Just the Boss standalone pedal.
I was reading about, I think it was the Boss ME3 or 5. I can't remember which one has a DS1, a CS1, a PH1, an OD1, and a DD2 all built into it. Like, all of those pedals to buy individually as collector's items would cost you $700-800, probably even nearly £1,000.
Yeah.
Yet ME5s are going on eBay for about 120 quid because people just don't realise that all they're doing is taking the same technology and building it in. That's what the ME8
Well, this is what's so good about the ME8.
It's got all that.
I literally, the other night, I sat for 2 hours probably I was seeing how many different delays I could put on, because you can have up to 4 delays at once if you play it right on the ME80. And I just sat there in a world of delay, just loving it. And the Terror Echo is incredible. The Terror Echo sound, it's kind of unlike any other delay pedal, really.
I think that the ME80 for me is actually more fun for experimenting than having single pedals.
Yeah,
I've actually plugged in my pedal board, loads of single pedals, and actually never got as cool a sound I've got out of something like
what's the price on ME80s at the moment?
$229, I think.
That's so cheap. It's so cheap, and they are awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably I didn't think you could make a multi-effects any better, but they sort of have.
Yeah, the ME70 was really good.
Yeah.
And the ME80, I think that we've spoken about this quite a lot, but the fact that they are willing to now kind of experiment and on these kind of like units that are almost a hybrid between single effects and multi-effects, that give you the preset options but allow you to get hands-on and control everything from the front, is phenomenal. It's just an incredible unit. David, I would highly recommend you get a Boss ME80. I do think it would replace everything that you've got by the looks of things.
Just a guitar, that, and a Blues Junior.
Yeah, just go straight into the Blues Junior, because you're not going to need the effects and the amp modelling that you've got on the VT20.
You can turn off the preamp modelling on the ME80 if you don't want it.
Exactly. I think it's a much better unit than the RP255. And to be honest, it's probably going to replace the single Boss pedals that you got in the BCB60. So yeah, I would say for $229 you are basically going to be sorted with an ME80. I can't rave about it enough.
Sweet.
Oh, actually, on the ME80 front, I got an inquiry about the status of running it in stereo. I think it was from a podcast listener, but I've lost the email, so I can't reply to it directly. He was wondering whether there's any sort of stereo ping pong delays in there, so bouncing between left and right to go out to individual amps if you're using 2 amps with it. There isn't. The Terror Echo and the choruses will run in stereo. They're probably, because it's so easy to upgrade the firmware, apparently it's something that they're looking into, so they're going to probably include like a ping pong setting to go between 2 different amps. Gregory via email says, I've heard much about swapping out capacitors to achieve a richer tone, i.e. Russian oil in paper, Sprague orange drops, bumblebees, etc. Before I go melting my guitar's soldering points, I'd like to know your opinions on the subject. Matt Knight, you're going to be the only person who can answer this.
Yes, well actually I did actually reply to him and said it was a very good question, because I'd recently done the same thing, and actually I would say there is no point in changing the capacitors in your guitar to make a big difference to your sound unless you're doing something more drastic at the same time, like changing your pickups. Just changing, there's a MIDI capacitor, you could just go and buy one and stick it in. Basically, if you're talking about a telly, it's going between the volume and tone to give you a tone control. That's what it's doing. That's what the capacitor does.
Yeah.
To be honest, if you used a higher, you wouldn't necessarily on a Fender maybe use a 500k rather than a 250k pot, which might make a bit of difference in terms of the overall sweep. I would say if you want to make a huge difference to your sound, if you're not happy with the sound, change the pickups.
Yeah, 100%.
And when you change the pickups, like on the Baja telly that I bought, I changed the pickups and I bought some massive paper or oil in paper capacitors, these massive huge capacitors, and yes, it actually does make it makes a huge difference to rolling. When you roll off the tone, you get a darker sound, you get more of a sweep, and you get a much brighter sound. But to be honest, if you were just going to go and do it and just change your capacitor, I think as well you've got no point of reference. You've got no it's not like plugging in 2 pedals and going, right, okay, quick, plug in the DS1, right, plug in the SD1, and you've got to go, oh yeah, you can hear the 2 sounds, or plug them in together.
They have to be in the same guitar to give you a fair test.
You can't like wire in a capacitor, go strum 3 chords and go yep, and then unsolder the whole thing, solder another one. To be honest, I think you'd be wasting your time. Realistically, I think I would say a lot of guitars out there come with fairly cheap ones. Yes, put some better ones in, but only if you're making another drastic change to your guitar.
That'd be my thoughts on it entirely. One last question. Ollie on Twitter says, new Fender Strat has direct to iPad iOS. Do the Podcast Ramblers see a future? I like that he calls us Ramblers, that's good. Do the Podcast Ramblers see a future where you bring an iPad to a gig instead of an amp? I want to do this in a separate podcast.
Because we spoke about this a bit before when we were talking about the Digitech thing.
The reason that I want to do this in a separate podcast...
Are we going to do an Ampless podcast?
No, I kind of want to do one where we talk a little bit about computer recording, because I was at the BMC, the Brighton Music Conference, a week or so ago, which was more of a kind of home recording, like DJ, producer focused thing. And I actually learnt a lot about some of the decent guitar recording systems that we do, like sound cards and really basic stuff. And I think we've never really talked about that enough. We've occasionally spoken about some sound cards, but I think it'd be good to give people an overview of the setups that are available to them to record their guitar, and things like how this iOS Strat is really helping with that as well.
I suppose it gives a chance to maybe talk about the new GP10K, like guitar modelling.
Exactly, yeah.
Like direct recording, and the Fishman triple play.
Yes.
I really want to give it a go. I'm waiting for this Strat to come out so I can really take it home and borrow it.
One of the most impressive demos that I got at NAMM at the beginning of the year was the triple play Strat.
Really?
Very, very good indeed. So Ollie, I hope you don't mind, but I think we'll come back to it because as far as I'm aware, the iOS Strat isn't available just yet. So if we talk about it next week, I think we'll still be fine. And there's a load of other stuff I want to go into about computer recording as well.
Sweet.
Any other business, gentlemen, or are we all done?
No, I think we're good.
I think we're done for today.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much for people sending questions in. You can always send in questions and we'll try to answer them, either straight off the bat or in a future podcast. podcast@gak.co.uk. Or you can get in touch on Facebook, facebook.com/GAK Music. Or you can get the shop on Twitter @GAK_co_UK. If you want to talk to us directly, I've had loads of new followers from the podcast this week on Twitter. And it's awesome because I like seeing what gear people are using, and you can ask us questions on there. You can get me @Mark_random. Matt and I, how can people get in touch with you?
You can email me directly in the store on matt.knight@gak.co.uk, or you can tweet me at matt_knightsy. That's Knight with SIE on the end. And I want to talk about the weirdest noises you've got from standard pedals. I'm looking into some pedals, like we were talking about some old Digitech units that kind of got some weird triggering things on there, and I want to do that, but I don't want to have to go out and source out a load of old stuff. I want new, fresh ideas from pedals that you've almost forgotten about.
Nice, I like that.
Like a DL4.
Joe, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, actually, first of all, there was one tiny small bit of business that I was going to mention that I completely forgot.
Is this going to be a plug?
No. Well, it's a plug for a piece of equipment.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Is that okay? I don't do that many plugs.
No,
do you think I'm pluggy?
Come on.
Am I pluggy?
No, you're not pluggy. Come on, what?
All right, okay. We've got plenty of time. You brought a proper SD card this time.
I did.
It's just that if you're thinking about a 6-string bass at all, at the moment we've got one of the SR500 series 6-string basses. They come they're mahogany body, oiled finish. So
this is Ibanez.
Yes. Did I not say
no.
Ibanez? Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah. So mahogany body with an oiled finish. So you get a lot of variation from kind of body to body. They have. Well, we've got the one on our shelf at the moment in our bass department. They seem to have spilled a considerable amount of oil, and it's come out a lot darker, and it looks amazing. It looks really nice. It's almost given,
but it's consistent. It's not when you say spilled. It sounds like
it's very
got
consistent.
A tea stain on it.
It's very consistent, but it's almost, the oiled finish has almost become gloss because it's so heavily oiled as opposed to the ordinary one. So it looks really high end, considering it's kind of their sort of just about mid-range. It's probably not even quite mid-range priced SR 6-string. It looks incredible. So that. Anyway, you can
for
get
more of this
me,
wisdom. How can people get in touch with you?
You can get hold of me on joe.branton@gak.co.uk, or you can find me on Twitter at Yosef_900, or I am also manning the Mark Packham parody Twitter at MarkRandom2.
Is this a real
where
thing?
I will be making really annoying statuses about random things.
Good. I really hope this isn't a real thing, and I would heavily discourage anyone who's thinking about starting that from doing so. Just one last thing. I realised that in 2 podcasts' time, it is our year anniversary. It will be the first podcast in May, or first podcast released in May. So maybe we even need to record it next week.
Maybe.
Basically, I need people. We want to do a live one. We want to try and do it on Google Hangouts. I know we've been saying it for a while. If you've got a G Plus account, which you can easily get, we just email me, podcast@gak.co.uk. We'll all get together. We'll get on G Plus as well. We'll do it over a webcam.
Over a webcam?
Indeed. And we'll record a live podcast. We won't pull any funny faces. They're already quite funny, but. I want to take some live questions, and I think if we can do it for the year anniversary, let's do this. Podcast@gak.co.uk. Get in touch, and you can join us for the live year anniversary podcast.
Hooray!
Woo!
A year. I can't believe it's been a year.
I can't believe we've been friends for a whole year.
I know. Well, not much has changed. We've got a better desk to do the podcast.
A slightly better desk.
That's about it. We changed the recorder that we use.
Yeah.
You've got better headphones. The headphones you used to use would always... leave black residue on your ears.
Yeah.
So that's better.
It is. Should we call it a night?
Yes.
Yeah. Good. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Imagine if it tasted like jelly beans, but...
No one, please, no.